I wasn't invited. Not even a pity text. My own family planned a luxury cruise, 10 days across the Caribbean, champagne on ice, matching outfits, the whole curated Instagram fantasy. And they left me off the list. On purpose, they said it was because I don't vibe with the group. That I bring stress. But let's be real, what they meant was that I make them uncomfortable. Because I work too hard. Because I don't fake laugh at my brother-in-law's sexist jokes. Because I didn't pretend to forget the words my sister threw at me after Mom's funeral, "You're just angry because no one ever picks you." That line still stings. Still echoes in my head, the day I stood at the dock, ticket in hand. Uniform pressed, heart pounding, not to sneak on board, but because this time I wasn't just a guest, I was the captain. They didn't know I'd been appointed interim captain of the very cruise line they booked through. They didn't know I'd be standing on that ship that morning, on the bridge, in uniform, and when the chief officer spotted me, his posture snapped to attention. "Welcome aboard, Captain Moore." I smiled. And I laughed, not from spite, but because sometimes, the tide turns when nobody's watching. And sometimes, the girl they tried to leave behind ends up steering the whole damn ship. But what happened next, when they realized who I really was, that part you won't believe. Hi. My name is Danielle Moore, and this is the story of how my family tried to erase me from their picture-perfect vacation, only to realize they'd set sail right into my waters. Before I tell you everything, I'd love to know you're here. Drop a hi in the comments, or just tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories can travel, and if this story hits home for you, if you've ever felt left out, underestimated, or quietly strong, please consider subscribing. It means more than you know to feel seen. Now, let me take you back. I woke up before sunrise like I always do. Old habits from the Navy, they don't fade easy. My apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Maybe. But I like it that way. Clean countertops. Coffee brewing. The steady crash of waves outside my Miami window. Some mornings, it feels like peace. Others, like exile. As I waited for the coffee to finish, I glanced at my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Just one glowing notification from Instagram. My younger sister, Kelly, the family's PR darling, had posted a story, a champagne glass perched against a luxury deck rail. The caption read, "More family legacy cruise, only the real ones on board." The phrase punched me in the gut. My stomach clenched. Before the caffeine even kicked in, today was embarkation day for the annual Moore family cruise. On the Aurelia Blue, the luxury vessel my father loved more than any of us. I hadn't set foot on that ship since last year. Since the storm, we'd hit a system coming in off the Keys. Rough waters. Bad visibility. And the only reason that ship made it back to port? Because I took the helm. Rerouted the course. Managed the response team. Me, I thought. Maybe this year, they'd remember that. Maybe they'd invite me, but nothing. No formal invite. No email. Not even a passive-aggressive group chat. I told myself I didn't care. But my hand froze around the coffee mug, and I stared into the steam longer than I'd admit. When I finally opened my laptop, a stray email caught my eye. It looked like it had been forwarded by accident. The sender? Callie's assistant. Subject, cabin assignment adjustments. My name wasn't listed. Instead, it read, Cabin 12 reassigned to Carter, Pilates coach. No need to mention Danielle. I let out a breath. Not a sigh. Something heavier. Like deflation, it wasn't just being left out, it was being erased. Quietly. Cleanly. Like I'd never mattered, but I didn't throw the laptop. I didn't rage text Callie. I didn't even unfollow her. I poured more coffee, stronger this time, then walked to the back closet. I opened the safe. Inside was a thick black folder. Ownership records for the Aurelia Blue. My standing contract with the Naval Reserves. A current, valid certification as acting captain. All signed. All legal. They'd forgotten something important. Maybe they thought the ship was theirs. Because they hosted parties on it. Because they wore white linen and took perfect sunset selfies. But you can't launch a vessel that size without someone authorized to sign off. Someone like me. That night, before turning off the lights, I opened the leather notebook I've carried since my second deployment. On the first blank page, I wrote one line. They erased me from the list. They forgot who signs the departure, and with that, something inside shifted. The silence they wrapped me in for years, it had become my armor, and I was done letting them write me out of my own story. The next morning, I didn't follow my usual routine. No yoga. No boardwalk jog. I sat at the kitchen counter, laptop open, coffee gone cold, surrounded by a mountain of binders and folders, each one thicker than the last. Naval protocol. Maritime law. Corporate partnership agreements. Things I'd memorized but still reread like my life depended on it, because it did. The Aurelia Blue wasn't just a floating party, it was a hybrid vessel, built for luxury, yes, but also for emergency response simulations and leadership at sea training. And buried deep in its operational contract, in a clause I remembered signing, was the line, any voyage utilizing onboard military-grade simulation systems must be cleared by a certified technical captain with an active Naval Reserve contract. That captain? Me. I triple-checked the clause. Printed the updated maintenance logs. Pulled the annual licensing agreement with the Naval Reserve. Just to be sure, I called the one person who always told me the truth, Commander Richard Odell. His voice came through the speaker with that gravelly Boston edge I remembered from training days. Moore. What's going on? I need to know if they can sail without me, I said. If they bypass the drill systems. They can't, he answered, quick and sharp. Not if they're using the Aurelia Blue. You're still listed as the primary tech authority on file. If they launch without you, they're violating Federal Maritime Code and active reserve regulations. I just stared at the speaker. They knew, my family, my own blood, knew I was the legal technical gatekeeper. And they still went out of their way to cut me out of every meeting, every email chain, every press preview. They were trying to sidestep the rules by branding the cruise as a private event. A social summit. Detached from military training, but the PR said otherwise. Photos showed Callie in a white jumpsuit leading a so-called leadership at sea seminar. The training deck dressed up like a TED Talk stage. Influencers tagging it as corporate empowerment meets ocean luxury. They were still using the Aurelia Blue's prestige, still capitalizing on tech I helped install. And pretending I didn't exist, I stood, walked into my bedroom, and opened the cedar chest at the back of my closet. My navy dress blues were there, pressed and retired. But beside them hung a darker, sleeker uniform, navy with silver trim. My Aurelia Blue captain's uniform. I hadn't worn it in 2 years. The fabric still smelled like salt and starch. I ironed it slowly, pressing each seam, lining up every bar and patch with precision. I tucked my command certification into the folder, along with the contracts, the Naval Reserve clearance, and a laminated copy of the ship's registration. Then I packed it all into a black leather bag. No announcement. No warning texts to Callie or Henry, my ex-husband, who would definitely be on board, pretending he had no idea how the ship actually ran. I just booked a ride to the port of Miami. The driver didn't ask questions. I didn't offer any. The morning sun lit the ship like a stage light. The Aurelia Blue stood tall and smug, already bustling with linen-clad guests dragging pastel luggage behind them. Strings of lights crisscrossed the dock. A banner waved overhead, More Legacy Summit 2025, the voyage of visionaries. What a joke. I stepped onto the dock, walked past the security desk, and placed my credentials folder on the table. The young officer looked up, a little confused. Ma'am. Can I help you? I smiled, not cold, not kind. Just steady. They forgot I wasn't invited, I said, sliding the file across. But I was always authorized. He opened it. His eyes widened. Then he nodded. Inside, the pier looked like a wedding reception collided with a champagne ad. Brass poles wrapped in garland. Pink and gold banners fluttering in the breeze. A string quartet played something so cheerful it felt like parody. At the center of it all stood Callie. Hair blown out. Makeup flawless. Surrounded by Henry and our cousin Travis, like PR reps guarding a celebrity, she raised a crystal flute toward the crowd. To tradition, legacy, and loyalty, she announced. We only sail with those who understand it. The crowd clinked glasses. Laughed. Toasted. My absence wasn't even acknowledged. As if I'd never been part of this family, I didn't wait for the toast to finish. I stepped onto the lower pier, in full view. Uniform on. Cap in place. Captain's bars shining in the sunlight. At first, no one noticed, but then Carlton, the ship's chief officer, did. We'd trained together, years ago. His voice rang loud and clear over the PA system, cutting through the violins like a blade. Captain Moore on deck. Welcome aboard, ma'am. Silence. Callie froze, flute midair. Henry's glass slipped and shattered. Travis looked away, pretending to admire the sky. Carlton stepped aside as I passed. He didn't salute. He didn't need to. I didn't stop for applause. I wasn't there to gloat. I walked past the floral arrangements, the champagne towers, and the guest check-in desk, straight up the gangway. The security guards didn't stop me. My badge was valid. My face too familiar. Inside the command center, I opened my leather notebook to the maintenance checklist, fuel logs. Simulation systems. Emergency override. Satellite uplinks. I moved through each item like clockwork. Muscle memory. When I reached the final page, I signed my name in black ink, calm. Focused, then handed the clipboard to the chief engineer. She's safe to sail. Unbeknownst to me, a staff member caught the entire moment on video, me in uniform, inspecting systems, signing off. By nightfall, the clip was online. Someone added orchestral music. Another zoomed in on my signature, but the comments said it all. Wait, she's the actual captain? So the outcast is the one keeping this ship afloat. Not the vibe they were expecting, huh? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Let them figure it out on their own. I was done explaining who I was. My presence was louder than any speech I could have given, and judging by Callie's frozen smile, they were finally starting to hear it. Dinner was served beneath a sky strung with warm lights and polished brass lanterns. The VIP deck was everything you'd expect from a family that cared more about appearance than honesty. Linen napkins folded into origami swans, wine labels longer than the guest list, and menu items that sounded like riddles. Truffle foam, citrus mist, basil essence. My name wasn't on the seating chart. Of course it wasn't. I didn't hesitate. I didn't scan the deck for some last-minute table. I headed toward the control panel alcove, where the engineering staff usually ate. Just as I approached, a young engineer, Sasha, I think, stood up and motioned to a small folding table set off from the main dining area. Staff eats here, she said, giving a small, nervous smile. You belong with us. I nodded. Thanks. Then I took a seat. A few heads turned. A few stares lingered. Callie sat at the head table in a pro-gray gown, her expression hard enough to cut glass. Her eyes locked on me like she was trying to mentally delete me from the scene. She didn't move at first. Just watched, calculated, measured. Then, just as the second course was being served, some overpriced sea base in a puddle of something called saffron air, Callie stood up, her heels clicking like the start of a countdown. She walked straight to me, leaning close, voice frozen behind a flawless smile. She whispered, "You really think you have the right to ruin our family's vacation?" I didn't rise, didn't flinch. I took a sip of water, calmly placed the glass back down, and said, "I'm not on vacation. I'm on duty, on a vessel I'm certified to operate." Her jaw twitched. Just barely. Like a hairline crack across glass, before she could say another word. The ship gave a sudden lurch. Not dramatic, but noticeable. Enough to send ripples through wine glasses and silence the conversations around us. Then, over the ship's intercom, came a low static buzz, followed by a cold automated voice, "Navigation deviation, 10 nautical miles." Silence spread like a stain. Henry, ever the loudmouth, stood from the head table and shouted toward the upper deck, "This is exactly why women shouldn't steer ships." His voice rang out like a bad joke. One no one dared to laugh at. I didn't look at him, didn't respond. I stood, crossed the deck, and headed toward the control panel. The interface had been changed, replaced with a glossy commercial navigation system. Flashy. Modern. But nowhere near as reliable as the Navy-grade one I'd trained on. Of course, Callie had probably swapped it to impress influencers, but they hadn't configured it properly. Firmware bugs. Poor calibration. A faulty tracking node feeding in wrong data. I recalibrated. Bypassed the errors. Rebooted the satellite sync. Manually corrected the heading. 7 minutes. That's all it took. No dramatics. No announcements. Just systems, precision, muscle memory. Then I walked back to my seat, picked up my fork, and resumed dinner. But word travels faster than any wave at sea. Sasha posted a quiet update to the crew's internal channel. "Captain Moore just saved our course." Within the hour, that post had been screenshotted, reshared, and reposted by a maritime blogger with over 500,000 followers. One caption read, "The woman they didn't invite just saved the ship they flaunt." The comments came fast. "Captain Moore is the reason that boat didn't crash into the Gulf." Outcast? More like the only competent one on board. Later that evening, dessert rolled out, some sculpted chocolate thing with gold foil and rose petals, and that's when my father appeared, Edward Moore. The man who always moved like a closing speech. He walked slowly across the deck, hands folded behind his back, and stopped beside me near the control console. "You should be sitting at the main table," he said, voice low. "With the family. Where you belong." I looked up at him. Then I looked over at the crew, the engineers who had shared their meals with me, held doors for me, stood silent while I worked. Then I turned back. "I am exactly where I belong," I said. He blinked. No argument, no rebuttal, just a long, quiet pause. In that moment, something cracked, not in me, but in the story they'd written about me. The dutiful daughter who never fit. The quiet sister. The officer no one acknowledged. I wasn't following their script anymore. I was writing my own, in my uniform. On my ship. With my name, not theirs. The morning after the incident, the Aurelia Blue moved smooth across the sea, like a thought you didn't want to interrupt. Breakfast was quiet. Unusually so. Callie sat alone, staring into her tea. Edward hid behind a newspaper, its edges trembling slightly. Henry? Nowhere to be seen, no blame. No apologies, just stillness, like the hush after a storm you didn't expect to survive. I picked a corner table on the auxiliary deck. Away from the buffet. Away from the drama. My phone buzzed. A single email caught my eye, Naval Reserve HQ subject, contract extension request. I opened it slowly. "Your performance and leadership have been observed. We'd like to discuss extending your contract." I read the words twice. My chest didn't swell with pride, it settled. This wasn't validation. It was clarity. Attached to the email was a proposal. An idea I'd quietly dreamed about for years: recommission the Aurelia Blue as a mobile maritime training platform. For at-risk youth. Specifically from coastal towns where opportunity rarely docks. It was bold, ambitious, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like mine, not borrowed. Not tolerated. Not inherited, mine. That peace didn't last long. I was down in the tech bay later that afternoon, reviewing tide logs, when the door slammed open. Henry, red-faced, chest puffed up, breathing like a man betrayed by gravity, he stormed in and slapped both palms on the metal desk like he owned the damn ocean. "You don't get to turn our family's legacy into a boot camp for strangers," he barked. I didn't flinch. I opened the drawer, pulled out the signed documents, and slid them across to him. The contract with the Naval Reserve, the licensing agreement, the full legal transfer of technical authority over the Aurelia Blue. "You're welcome to contest it," I said, calm as glass. "But I have full legal control of this ship's operations. These signatures make it official." He scanned the papers, searching for a crack that didn't exist. "You planned this," he hissed. I didn't answer. He wasn't asking. By noon, the story had spilled past the decks. A leadership blog picked up Sasha's footage. They looped my signature in slow motion and headlined the piece, "Ex-Navy officer saves cruise ship, wasn't even on the guest list." The comments were brutal. Toward them, "Give her the whole damn ship. Captain Moore's the only legacy that matters. She's not just competent. She's the reason that boat didn't crash into Cuba." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I took a long walk along the starboard deck, letting the wind run along the edge of my collar. The sky had shifted, lighter, like it knew. As I passed the observation rail, I saw Callie. She didn't speak. Her face was blank, like she was mid-thought and couldn't finish the sentence. No smugness. No spin. I didn't stop. I didn't smile. I just kept walking. Back in my cabin, I opened my phone and typed a short message to Commander Odell. "Let's talk about the next phase. I'm ready to take the ship in a new direction." I hit send, not to prove anything, just to move forward. That night, I returned to my quarters late. The ocean outside the porthole was a dark sheet of ink. I dropped a binder of schematics on the desk, too tired to take off my boots. That's when I noticed something, an envelope, tucked beneath the corner of the blueprint folder. Small. Time-worn, written in a looping, unmistakable script, "For your eyes only, Mom." My breath caught. That handwriting hadn't changed in decades. My fingers hovered. Then broke the seal. Inside was a letter. Handwritten. Shaky. The ink smudged in spots like she'd stopped and started too many times. It wasn't long, but it landed like an anchor. "Your father didn't want me to sign your Navy application. He thought it would be a mistake, said it would hurt Henry, said if you ever rose higher, it would break him. When you came home with honors, he asked Callie to make sure you never unsettled the family image again." I didn't stop it. "I'm sorry." I didn't cry, not right away, but I shook, because knowing something is one thing. Seeing it in ink, written by the one woman who always claimed to be neutral, made it real. This hadn't been an accident. This was exile by design, because my independence threatened the structure. Because my success rewrote the hierarchy. Because I wouldn't play the part of the obedient daughter, the quiet sister, the supporting act, and they couldn't handle that. The next morning, I found Margaret, my mother, alone in the tea lounge. Her cup sat untouched, the spoon still in it, stirring long after the tea had gone cold. She didn't look surprised when I sat down. "You got it," she said quietly, still staring at the cup. I nodded. "Set the envelope between us." "Why now?" I asked. Her shoulders dropped. "I thought silence protected us," she said. "I thought peace was more important than truth." I studied her, not as my mother, but as a woman who made a bargain and lived long enough to regret it. "Your silence," I said, "is why I don't want a seat at your table anymore." She didn't argue, she just blinked. Looked down. The sound of the engine filled the space between us. By midday, the air had turned tense. Like a storm building just out of sight, word had gotten out about my proposal to convert the Aurelia Blue into a training ship for underserved youth. And as usual, Henry didn't approach with a question, he approached with a declaration. At the family's midday briefing, a tradition I'd never once been invited to, he stood in front of the group, voice already raised. "She's hijacking the family's legacy," he shouted, holding up a printed copy of the contract I hadn't even submitted publicly yet. "She's turning our ship into a Navy boot camp for strangers. I'll sue. This is abuse of authority." I didn't rise, didn't argue. "I haven't hijacked anything," I said. "I executed authority granted by the charter." The murmurs came next. Quiet but unmistakable. Callie looked away, Edward adjusted his tie, no one defended him, but for once, I didn't need them to. This wasn't about approval anymore, it was about ownership, and I wasn't asking for permission. By sunset, the ship was quieter than usual. Like it was holding its breath. That evening, an alert popped up in my inbox. Subject: Notice of legal action. Henry had filed a lawsuit, claimed I'd abused technical access. Disrupted family inheritance. I didn't laugh. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the screen, watching the absurdity pile up like a rogue wave. Henry, the man who hadn't touched a blueprint in his life, was now accusing me of stealing the ship he barely understood. Later that night, there was a knock at my cabin door. I opened it. Callie stood there. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Face bare in a way that looked honest. She didn't ask to come in, she just handed me a black USB. "I wasn't going to pick sides," she said. "But I can't let him bury the truth anymore." Then she turned and walked away. When I plugged in the drive, I didn't blink. It wasn't shocking. Just confirmation, bank records, repair invoices, ghost crew payments. All of it, meticulously altered by Henry to reroute funds from the ship's operations to his vanity projects. A yacht docked in Croatia. A shell consulting firm. Overtime payouts to people who didn't exist. He hadn't just mismanaged the legacy, he was bleeding it dry. I found Callie again the next morning, sitting on the lower maintenance deck. Her arms wrapped around herself like she wasn't sure if she was cold or guilty. "I used to think you just liked causing chaos," she whispered, "but now I get it. You weren't trying to draw attention. You were trying to survive. You were just brave enough to do it without asking permission." We sat there for a while. Silent, then I finally said, "That's the difference between us. I wanted freedom. You wanted approval." She nodded, and for once didn't defend herself. The hearing was held that afternoon in the lower lounge. Not a courtroom, but the tension said otherwise. Present, legal counsel, board reps from the Moore Family Trust, a few longtime investors. Henry arrived smug, until I started presenting, one document at a time, the original charter. Federal training authorizations. Naval commendation letters. Legal transfer of operations. Then I slid the final file across the table, Henry's file, cross-referenced. Notarized. Certified. Silence. For a man who loved to shout, Henry suddenly couldn't breathe. "You ruined my reputation," he choked. "You humiliated me in front of the entire family." I leaned forward. Voice quiet but sharp, "You did that all by yourself. I just handed you the mirror." Margaret stared at her hands. Edward opened his mouth, but Margaret placed a hand on his wrist. He closed it again. I stood. "My presence here isn't about reclaiming a seat," I said. "It's about ending the version of this story that you've all been telling without me." That night was the final banquet. Legacy night. The Aurelia Blue was lit like a floating stage. White linen. Silver cutlery. Spotlights tracing across the deck like searchlights. Naturally, I wasn't on the guest list. Naturally, I walked in anyway, simple black dress. Folder in hand. Eye steady, Callie took the stage first. Regal. Poised. Wearing our grandmother's sapphire necklace like a crown, "Tonight," she began, "we honor the strength of the Moore name. This ship isn't just metal and design, it's history. And only those who understand its weight are fit to carry it. Her voice coated the room like silk, and her eyes skipped right over me. I stood. I'd like to say a few words, I said. Every fork paused mid-air. I walked to the center, opened the folder, laid out one document at a time, the original purchase agreement, partially funded by my consultancy when the family fund ran dry, the federal partnership contracts, the official agreement with the Naval Reserve, converting the Aurelia Blue into a mobile leadership platform. Then I pulled out the final paper, Henry's signature, authorizing the financial shell game he tried to pin on me. I'm not stealing the legacy, I said. I'm refusing to let it be built on my work while pretending I never existed. Silence. Then, Margaret stood, her voice cracked. I used to believe daughters should stay quiet. That silence kept things in place. But I see now, my silence made space for men who believed you were lesser. She looked at me. I'm sorry. Edward shifted. She turned to him. Enough, Ed. It's time you listened. Then, a murmur from the back. One uncle cleared his throat. If Danielle's the one running the ship. YVE, we've been acting like she's the outsider. More murmurs. Some nods. A slow, heavy shift. I didn't stay for dessert. I gathered my papers, faced the room one last time. I didn't come for applause. Or forgiveness. I came to end the fiction. And I walked out. No music. No fanfare, just the sound of my heels on the deck, and the ship behind me, finally mine. 1 week later, a letter arrived, handwritten. Cream stationery. Blue ink, Margaret's script. If you still have even a thread of trust left in me, meet me and Callie on the Aurelia Blue. No speeches. Just the three of us. One time. I read it twice, then I packed light. For the first time in my life, I boarded that ship not as a captain. Not as an officer. Not even as an opponent, but as a daughter, and a sister. We sailed past the breakwater under a soft gray sky. On the upper deck, Margaret walked slowly. She handed me a thin folder. Sketches, she said. Journal entries. From when I was still an artist, before I chose silence. I flipped through them. They were raw. Honest. I was taught to be proper. Polished, she said. But you. You chose truth. That's braver than I ever was. And I'm proud of you, even if I didn't know how to say it before. Callie sat nearby, knees pulled to her chest. I used to think control meant strength, she whispered. Control over image. Over stories. Over who got remembered. She looked at me. But you just told the truth. Even when it cost you everything. I didn't say anything. Instead, I walked over to the training console. Flipped on the emergency helm simulator. Take the wheel, I told her. I'll coach. She hesitated, then stepped forward. Margaret stood behind us, quiet. Solid. Callie's hands trembled, but she made the right moves, not perfectly, but with intention. We watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting gold across the deck. No one spoke, but somehow, nothing else needed to be said. 1 year later, Miami felt like a different lifetime. I stepped out of my apartment in a navy polo with a new logo, Horizon Blue Survival Academy. I no longer captained the Aurelia Blue. She'd been recommissioned as a naval training hub. I stayed on as curriculum lead, but now I charted paths on land, too. A folded newspaper sat on my kitchen table. Captain Moore, Building Bridges Beyond Blood. I didn't read it. I already knew what it said. That year, we expanded the academy to include real rescue certifications. 2 teams had already saved swimmers during storms using skills they'd learned in my program. At a talk, someone asked, "Do you still talk to your family?" I smiled. Family is complicated, I said. But if it means giving each other space to be honest, then yes, I'm building one again. On my terms. Weeks later. A package arrived, unmarked. Just my name, inside, a painting, oil on canvas. The Aurelia Blue at sunrise. A silhouette standing at the bow, a note on the back, "Thank you for giving me the courage to live honestly, M." I hung it in my office, right next to my first mission map. Callie never joined the academy. But she sent quarterly donations. We didn't text much. Just enough. "Need help with the next promo video?" She'd write. Sometimes I said no, sometimes yes. We didn't talk about the cruise anymore. We didn't need to. On a quiet Tuesday, I stood on the deck of our newest training vessel, smaller than the Aurelia Blue. Sleek. White. Dignified. Her name, Liberty Wake. I pulled off my sunglasses, looked at the line of new trainees. "When the wind picks up," I said, "don't wait for someone to save you. Learn to steer. Then teach someone else how." The camera panned wide, sea behind me, sunlight ahead. And I realized something. I hadn't just survived the storm, I'd learned to chart a new course, on waters I chose, with a name I earned, and a truth no one could erase. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. And if you've ever been underestimated, remember, you don't need permission to redefine your worth, you just need the truth, and the courage to live it.